You win some and you lose some, and that seems to be the theme of the Winnipeg Jets lately, splitting a weekend series between the Blackhawks and the Blue Jackets. We'll chat about that on tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets.
You're Locked On the Hockey Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Evening, friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at HLLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, we're going to be talking about Winnipeg's weekend series. Obviously, this was an away and a home against Chicago and the Blue Jackets, and the Jets only won one of these games, which isn't the worst. Whenever you play back-to-backs, you are usually expected to lose at least one of these games, whether it's in overtime, a shootout, or even in regulation. And in this case, it was regulation, right? But the Jets took the first game, which is probably the most important part. And you'd say that it was a pretty good win. So we're going to get the good out of the way, and then we're going to move to the bad later. But before we dive into any of that, just wanted to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Now, Winnipeg had a big opportunity to come away with 4 points, and they came away with 2, and that came against the Chicago Blackhawks. This game, I think, was pretty much a pretty good follow-up with what I thought would happen. You know, the last episode, I mentioned I was expecting the Jets to come away with a victory, and they pretty much did exactly that. You know, Winnipeg was, especially after the first period, the much better team. And, you know, not super shocking, the Blackhawks are not a great squad. They are rebuilding, and you can kind of tell that from some of their recent performances. I think I was expecting maybe more of a pushback from Chicago, and that might have actually been giving them a bit too much credit, if I'm being honest. I thought, you know, this would be a big opportunity for one of these teams to maybe make a bit of a statement, especially after both have been having a rough couple of weeks. But Winnipeg was just far and away the much more dominant squad. I mean, Chicago, especially from the second period on, really wasn't competitive. So I don't know if I can use this game as a really strong barometer for where the Jets are at, but all the same, you know, you have to look at the results, and the Jets absolutely took care of business. In fact, there was no one that really stood out as having a particularly poor outing. I mean, you could argue that maybe the top line wasn't super impressive outside of Velarde, but on the whole, I mean, it's been pretty much the same of what we've seen the last few weeks, where I'd argue maybe the depth lines were generally having better games. Maybe the top line contributed a goal or two from just the pure skill that exists in this unit. But in a game like this, where Chicago just wasn't really ever at the races, you know, you wouldn't really feel like it gives you the fairest assessment of what's been going on with this team. And so I look at this game as a nice little, you know, reprieve, an easy 2 points for the Jets, and you'll see a couple of goals against in the first period or so. Honestly, I don't really know that it was anything too much to be concerned about. The Vlasic power play goal was just, you know, bit of a mistake on the doorstop, and nothing you can really do about that. Alec Martinez getting a bit of an inside step on somebody. But other than that, you know, the Hawks really didn't generate much of anything. They had 14 whole shots on goal, not too much to be proud of. Bedard was, generally kept pretty quiet. Teravainen didn't really get much going. Hall was pretty quiet. So, you know, for the most part, the Jets just control the neutral zone, they control the defensive zone, and they were able to take care of business, which is probably what you wanted out of this game. I will say that the Lowry line had a really big evening, and, you know, after a rough couple of games, they showed out big time. Lowry was just little broing Bedard the whole game. Winnipeg, I thought, was very physical and just sort of pushed the Hawks around, which, you know, Chicago, look, they are a bad team. They're at the bottom of the league for a reason. But by the same token, I think that they went through quite a few renovations in the offseason. And so, in theory, this should have been a tougher opponent in this game. But again, the Jets just kind of showed that their talent at times can absolutely take over. And Mark Scheifele finally scored his 14th goal of the season. I know that sounds a little bit strange to say finally, but he's been pretty quiet the past couple of weeks. The wrist injury for him appears to be really holding him back. And I think in this game, if there's something that you could particularly note as a problem for him, he seemingly skated into his line mates a lot, especially on the power play and by the opposing blue line. I don't know what was going on there, but it seemed like he kept missing assignments or maybe not switching over the way he was supposed to. And so he'd run into Morrissey or something. And it was just very strange. He did it multiple times, and I don't know what's up with that. Whatever his injury continues to be, it's just really making it hard for him to do the sorts of stuff that are usually second nature. I mean, we're talking about a guy who has perennially been, a 60, 70, 80-point player, one of our most, effective finishers. And to see him really struggle to do some of the basics, it's difficult, right? He'll still skate well, he'll still force turnovers, and sometimes he can really bully a shift. But in terms of like getting shots off and stuff, it just really hasn't been something that's been an easy run for him. His goal was basically an empty net that he really couldn't afford to miss. I don't think that he was necessarily getting the most out of that shot, but I think for him, it was just important to get a goal to begin with, any sort of goal, right? It's not like he's been completely dry in scoring. He's had maybe a handful of assists, but, in terms of the finishing, you can tell that the right wrist of his just continues to really nag him. I know he's taken some faceoffs, but he just doesn't look right. And I think that that's going to be a bit of a disconcerting theme going forward. It's especially noticeable when Connor and Velarde are still trying to do their stuff. I thought Velarde was really effective, and his tip from the Stanley shot was phenomenal. An excellent tip, better than you could have asked for. And Velarde just really showing why I think he was still the best player in the Dubois trade. He's definitely having a great year, on pace for like a 30-plus goal season. And, for the Jets, just an absolutely stellar find. And I'm very happy with him so far. Even in his off games, he still tries to contribute at least something decent. So, yeah, happy with that. I will say that, this line, I do think against better teams, again, continues to have trouble. I just don't know what it is about Connor Scheifele-Velarde that I don't like, aside from the lack of foot speed. But I just think at some point the Jets are going to have to figure out a way to make it work better. And it does mean that you're going to have to make a change at some point. The individual parts are all very skilled, but when they're put together, it just doesn't really feel like you're getting the sum of what you'd expect. So, yeah, thoughts for stuff in the future, but, it is what it is. Mason Appleton did also score in this one. He got an empty netter, and Lambert probably will be seeing this game in his nightmares. He almost scored his first NHL goal, whiffed on an empty net, and should have had an assist on a Perfetti whiff, but I thought that this was his best game as an NHL pro. He was everywhere. I thought that his line was very creative and very fun, and I would have liked to have seen a little more of it. The one thing that I kind of wished Arniel didn't do as much was benching, some of the younger players late in the game. I know that you're trying to defend a lead, but I thought Lambert probably deserved a couple of late shifts. Perfetti has sort of broken out of that doghouse, but it seems like Lambert is now the one in it because Iafallo keeps going onto that second line late in games. So, again, just kind of like a minor, I wouldn't even call it a complaint, just a note. Like, that feels a little old-fashioned to me, but I mean, it is what it is. I think if Lambert was more of like a Connor in defense, I'd maybe understand why you'd bench him. But I think Lambert actually backchecks pretty aggressively, and he might not win every physical battle, but he does fight for pucks, and he does really make his presence known defensively. So, I just don't know if I necessarily agree with having him sit, especially when, he was so close to getting a goal or two. So, but, again, really, really nitpicky kind of stuff. Otherwise, thought it was a great game for him. And I do think at some point he's going to get some points here in the very near future. But obviously, that didn't necessarily happen in today's game against the Blue Jackets. And we'll chat about what went wrong for Winnipeg's second game and their first home game in some stretch in just a little bit. But before we dive into all of that, I did want to let you know about how you can save money on Mint Mobile. I love a great deal as much as the next guy, but I'm not going to crawl through a bed of hot coals just to get a few good deals, right? It's got to be something that's easy, no hoops, no BS. And so when Mint Mobile said it was easy to get wireless for $15 a month, I thought to myself, I don't really believe that, right? How can you get that for $15 a month with the purchase of a 3-month plan? Just doesn't sound real. Turns out, though, it really is that easy to get wireless for $15. The longest part of the process was the time I spent on hold waiting to break up with my old provider. All plans come with high-speed data and unlimited talking text delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. You can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and bring your phone number along with all your existing contacts. To get started, all you have to do is go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl, and there you'll see that right now all 3-month plans are only $15 a month, including the unlimited plan. To get this new customer offer and your new 3-month premium wireless plan for just $15 a month, again, go to mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. That's mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/lockedonnhl. $45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 a month. No new customers on first 3-month plan only. Speed slower, above 40 gigs on unlimited plan. Additional taxes, fees, and restrictions apply. See Mint Mobile for details. While we're at it, I also wanted to let you know about our friends and partners at Game Time. When it comes to buying tickets, a lot of you are used to adding a ticket to your cart and getting hit with loads of surprise fees. No one likes that, and Game Time doesn't either. That's why they allow you to toggle all-in pricing up front so that when you switch it on, you'll see all of your final fees and your final price reflected before you hit checkout. And we all know that that is a great way to save time and money, and they want to save you even more money with a brand new feature called Game Time Picks, which helps you filter out all the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They even offer you seat views before you buy and come back with their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and so much more. If you're looking for Jets games, Jets tickets, this is a great resale option. Or if you're thinking about maybe the Jays games as we start getting closer and closer to winter into, spring. Obviously, baseball is still a good ways away, but if you want to get in some early tickets for the start of the season, this is a great way to do it right now from other sellers who are maybe looking to hand off the baseball experience to a dedicated fan. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LSCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode as we are chatting about Winnipeg's weekend slate of games. The first game, the Jets basically wiped the floor with Chicago. The second game, a little bit of a different story against Columbus. And this was the team that I thought was going to give the Jets a bit more trouble out of the two. The Blue Jackets this year, I wouldn't say are great. They are at the bottom of the Metro Division, but when you look at the actual Metro itself, they're only 2 points behind the Rangers, and the Rangers were said to be a real playoff contender. So Columbus, despite some of the terrible things that have happened to this team this year, they remain very strong in spirit, and seemingly, they're very tight knit. I think that this team, certainly won't be making the playoffs, but I think it offers a note of hope and optimism for a team that has really been through the ringer this year. And what's very interesting about Columbus is that, generally speaking, their home record's very good. It's the away record that's really been a problem for them. But in their last 10 games, they are 6-3-1, and that includes tonight's game. They just really outplayed Winnipeg. And, it wasn't by a huge margin. I think there were definitely periods where the Jets were able to claw back and actually created a fair few chances. But for the most part, the Jackets held the edge. And I think it was especially noticeable in the danger. The Jets' shot clock, I think, was maybe looking not too bad, but the reality was that the Blue Jackets were the ones getting to the slot in the most dangerous areas in front of Comrie, while Winnipeg was really struggling to create equally dangerous chances in front of Merzlikins. And it wasn't like Winnipeg was bad in this game. I think that would be a bit of a stretch, but I also wouldn't say the Jets were good. I think the scoreline wasn't that unreflective of what Winnipeg put together. It just kind of felt like the Jets were maybe I don't know, struggling to create offense. I think that they try to get a little too cute down low, and it just felt like Winnipeg didn't really have it. I don't know what you describe that as, not having it, whether it's your skating legs, maybe the attention and focus, some of your scoring and finishing. It just felt like Winnipeg, whatever it was, didn't have it. I think fatigue has definitely been a problem recently, and the injuries that the Jets have had are also taking a pretty big toll. Ehlers and Sandberg both being out. It's been, noticeable not to have them. But some of the problems against these teams where the Jets aren't creating a lot at 5v5 kind of go back to even before Winnipeg uh, lost both players. It's been a problem on and off throughout the start of the season, even during the really big winning streaks. The Jets definitely had some 5v5 issues, and I think now that they're both gone, it's a lot more noticeable. So for Winnipeg, I just kind of wonder why they're continuing to not really make a lot of changes. I don't think that you should make changes just to make them and throw players all up and down the lineup willy-nilly, but I think the Jets need to try making some adjustments and give this team a consistent spark. I don't want to read too much into this and say that this loss invalidates the good work that the Jets did maybe in the previous couple of games, but Winnipeg hasn't exactly been up to snuff even against more middling opponents. And the blue or the Blackhawks maybe being a bit of an exception. It just felt like the Jets the past couple of games have been I think that's a pretty fair assessment. They're sort of playing mediocre hockey. They're either struggling to beat teams like Buffalo, or they're outright losing to squads like Columbus. And against really good teams, we saw what happened on the road trip. Now, again, I think all of this is worth prefacing with the fact that the Jets have played a lot of games in a short span of time, and Winnipeg just has had a brutal travel schedule. They've had one of the worst travel schedules of any team in the NHL over the past month and a half. So I think that is definitely worth acknowledging, and that has had a pretty noticeable impact. But by the same token, a lot of other teams are playing lots of hockey, and while they may not have as bad of a travel schedule as the Jets have had, they're still going about, right? And at some point, if you're a really good team, you've just got to figure out a way to get through it. And I think the Jets have kind of struggled to do that. The power play looked pretty listless. The top line in this game was just ugly. I know Connor scored one goal, but they were that line again. I don't like plus or minus, but the top line was a -3, and I think that's probably worth denoting. Unfortunately, the blue line was also just a complete mess. Outside of Morrissey and DeMello, Pionk and Fleury were terrible. Miller and Stanley together were awful. And so you just don't really seem to get much of a break, right? If one thing maybe goes well for you, something else breaks. And it just felt like the defensive breakdowns in tonight's game were, especially noticeable around the crease and with a couple of line pairings and stuff on the ice that just really should have been doing better. So, I mean, I'm not going to say that I absolutely expected a Jets win against the Jackets, but I thought at least a point might have been good. And Connor himself, was pretty critical and said, we were tied 1-1 heading into the third period, and it all just sort of slipped away in the last 20 minutes. So obviously it's not just us as fans that are noticing this. Some of the players are starting to get frustrated, and I'm kind of wondering if Connor vocalizing his own displeasure with their performance means he might be willing to make a change himself and get away from Scheifele. That trio with him and Velarde just really hasn't been working all that well, and I know that Connor and Scheifele do like playing with each other a lot, but at some point, you're going to have to figure out why this doesn't work at 5v5 that well. Maybe they don't see it that way, but I think pretty much everyone else does. And this trio actually is one of the most commonly used lines in the whole league. Apparently, Garrett Hold did a quick look, and it is the most commonly used unique trio of 3 players in the NHL, which is not a great sign for Winnipeg. I think that the Jets are definitely committed, and I get why, but if you're really committed to these lines and they're not working that well, maybe you want to change something up a little bit. I don't know. I know that the line combinations that you're able to pull out right now are a little bit limited thanks to the Ehlers injury, but certainly there has to be a better way to do it than continuing to go back to the same well that's really not giving you good results. I don't mind if you give a line a chance to redeem itself, but I feel like CSV has kind of been on and off throughout most of the year. And last year we had a decent sample where they just weren't that great together. And so, we're getting to the point where 30, 40 games of this trio not being great probably tells you a bit about their future. Again, when it's the power play or, an empty net situation, having them all on the ice together gives you some pretty dynamite results. But at even strength, not the same case. So Winnipeg really got to figure that out. I know that they're, for a lot of reasons, loath to make those changes, but I don't know, man. If the coaching staff can't get them apart, if the players aren't willing to, split themselves off, then, somebody is going to have to make a decision from higher up, because the longer that this goes on, the more that it puts the Jets at a disadvantage against top teams. And in the playoffs, that trio is going to kill this team. I love them, and I think that they're all great players individually, but together, it's a real matchup problem. And unless they suddenly turn into a great top line in the second half of the season, which, I mean, it is possible. I just don't see it happening, right? They haven't been good for a while now. They haven't been good throughout most of the games that they play unless it's against a really slow opponent. So I just don't see that happening once they get to the playoffs. And I know a lot of other teams aren't that great either, but still, the faster, speedier teams that can forecheck aggressively have put the Jets in a really tough position, and it starts with the top line. So, the Jets, I don't know what to do, man. If they're not willing to make these changes, they're going to fall to the same problems that they always do. And I really hope that that's not the fate this year, because I really feel like this team is worthy of something more than that. They're 20-9, even with this recent bad stretch. That's a crazy good record. And I feel like this team deserves a little bit of playoff fun, more than just 5 games because they only win 1, right? So, I feel like I always say the same things. Maybe it'll change tomorrow, maybe not. I don't know. This upcoming week of games is not going to be easy, but the good news is they're all at home, so I'm pretty happy about that. Bruins, Knights, and Canadians, I feel like there's at least, 3 to 4 points out of these games. Winnipeg should definitely come away with some decent results. You get 3 home games, and if they don't come away with wins in at least 1 or 2 of these, yeah, that's probably a sign that things are not going super well. But, it is what it is, right? At some point, we can only sort of sit back and throw our hands up and say, the Jets just got to play the games. That's all they got to do. But there is one thing that I think is worth talking about, and it's the fact that with all the injuries and stuff, the Jets keep making some lineup choices outside of the top line that I feel like are actively making it harder for them to win. And unfortunately, I am talking about the defense, and you probably know where I'm going with this. We'll chat about, the load management question in just a brief moment. But before we go any further, just wanted to let you know about FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets in the NFL all in one place. If you were watching Rams-Bills, maybe you were getting a hunch in the middle of in that game, and maybe you were thinking, the Bills are going to somehow pull this out. Or maybe you were watching Chiefs and you were thinking that Kansas City was going to come away with yet again devil magic, which they did. Well, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page, all where you're placing your bets in real time. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That's all at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's episode, as we're just closing out with some thoughts on the Jets defense and some of the decisions that Winnipeg continues to make. I don't want to, throw lots of guys under the bus, but I think the Jets defense really hasn't been particularly good the past couple of weeks, and it's not super shocking. You lose your best defender in Sandberg, and so that's obviously going to have a pretty big impact on the team overall. But for the Jets, they really seem to want to make the Logan Stanley thing happen, and I question why they're so committed to this. Stanley is one of those guys that always fights for the badge. He fights really hard. He's always giving 100%. But the problem with him is that he's just not doing that well. Every time I watch him, he's getting turnstiled. Guys are getting the inside angle on him. He's missing defensive reads. He's getting beat at the net. And like these are all things that are just basic aspects of being a blue liner that he's struggling with. And he's not really able to get his offensive skating going because he's spending a lot of his time in the defensive zone. And sure, he does technically kill penalties, but he doesn't do it well. And defensively, he's having a really tough time. If he's playing with Heinola or Miller, it doesn't really matter. He's struggling either way. And I think the commitment to him is really putting this team at a huge disadvantage because you're already dealing with a Fleury-Pionk pairing that is just chaos. I think Fleury is trying his hardest as well, and he'll have a couple of really good shifts, and I feel like on the 2-on-1s that he's had to face, he's actually broken up those well on a pretty consistent basis. But just in general, the Fleury-Pionk pairing is bad. Defensively, they're a nightmare. They turn the puck over a lot. Under pressure, they just continually fire passes into unintended destinations, which usually results in turnovers. And, for whatever points production that they give you, they're just not doing enough in their own end, and they're giving up more to their opponents. So, the Jets just only have one functional D pairing, and that includes one of the guys who's struggling the most in DeMello. So if you're going to keep going this route, you really have to limit the amount of gosh, how do I say this? How many anchors you have on your blue line, right? If you're going to have two bad pairings and you only have one functional one, then that's going to submarine any of your production for your forwards too. All of this has a domino knock-on effect, and if your puck moving and passing ability on the back end is as bad as it is right now for the Jets, it's going to make life very difficult for your forwards too. This team really relies on having smart aggression and good offensive zone activations, and without D that can actually do it, you're going to be forced in your own end for most of the game. I mean, a lot of the offense just continues to die, and so I look at this team and I'm thinking to myself, they benched Heinola for load management because of his injury. He is still recovering, but why was Stanley not given the same load management? He had a pretty serious upper body injury, from what I understand, or mid body injury, and he's been played loads. And so it just doesn't really add up to me. Stanley continually gets tons of minutes, or I wouldn't say like tons of minutes per game, but certainly more than Heinola does. And I just don't understand what Winnipeg really sees in him. Maybe some team out there is going to turn him into the next Zdeno Chara, but based on what I'm seeing, what he is right now is probably what he's likely to be going forward. And, that's a fine seventh defender, but not really a guy that I think you should be starting if you're serious about having a deep playoff run. And the Jets probably know this too. I just wonder what happens when Samberg gets healthy. Who's actually going to come out of the lineup? For all this discussion about how much Arneal loves Heinola, I feel like Heinola has been scratched more often, and I don't understand it. Heinola Miller was a much better pairing than Stanley Miller. I don't know why you wouldn't try that again. Maybe they think that Heinola just can't kill penalties, and so his value to the team is thereby limited. But, I feel like Winnipeg just keeps spinning its wheels, and so long as Stanley is starting, you're going to have at least one D pairing that you basically can't use at all. So for me, I'm just disappointed, but I'm not surprised. And I feel like in a game like the Blue Jackets one we saw, where it was close margins until the third period, and a lot of it came from really bad defensive breakdowns, maybe Heinola would have made a difference, maybe not. But we all kind of know what Stanley is at this point. We know that Fleury-Pionk is also having a tough one. So maybe try and give yourself a little bit of a break and not put yourself on the back foot almost immediately. It's just nuts that we're like in year 8 or 9 with Stanley and we're still having these conversations. And somehow the Jets just seemingly don't want to admit that they were wrong here. But it is what it is. I'm sure plenty of teams make the same decisions. I think the Jets don't have the same margin of error that a lot of other teams do. But maybe somebody here disagrees with me. Let me know what you think about all of this load management stuff. Do you really buy it? Do you think that they just don't trust Heinola? Drop your thoughts and comments below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. For tonight's episode, though, that is going to be all the time that we have. I thank you so much for listening and making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. Tomorrow, we'll have a preview of Winnipeg versus Boston. Let's hope for at least some kind of a change. I'm tired of watching the same team, go out into these games and either barely beat opponents or just outright lose. Surely the Jets have to figure out a way to make something that's a little more watchable than what we're seeing. But I don't know. We'll see. Like I said, though, for tonight's episode, that is all the time that we have. Thanks so much for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.